Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 5 of Business Newsletter Recap. I'm your host, Nathan Pohl, digital marketer by day and business nerd by night. I've racked up thousands of hours of business podcast listening and newsletter reading, and my goal is to bring you the highlights of some of the top business newsletters out there in podcast format. Each episode, I feature 3 editions of top newsletters that I found most insightful. If any newsletter is particularly beneficial to you, I will have links in the show notes to follow the creators on social media and to sign up for yourself. If you missed episodes 1 through 4, I'd appreciate it if you went back and gave it a listen on Spotify or YouTube. I'm really trying to collect a lot of feedback of what's helpful and what might not be. So I'd appreciate if you take a listen. If you listen to all 4 of them through, it's only about an hour. So go back and do that after this episode if you haven't already. We're starting off today with a selection from The Psychology of Marketing, written by Stacked Marketer. They're a marketing media company with a couple of different newsletters that are great for anyone looking to stay up to date on marketing trends and tactics, and this one is my favorite. They are our second repeat of the show, and we highlighted them in episode 1 as well, where we went over the endowment effect. Today's edition covers the labor illusion, the phenomenon where people equate effort with value. In 2011, a pair of Harvard researchers published the results of experiments around this topic to management science. In one of the experiments, they had hundreds of participants use a simulated travel booking site. One group would get a longer wait time when searching for flights in the time frame that they selected, but they were showed hundreds of flights being scrolled through while they waited, while the other group only saw a progress bar, but had a shorter wait. Conventional wisdom would say that the group who got their results faster, or the ones who saw only the progress bar, would rate the services as more valuable. But the study actually found the group who watched the site comb through thousands of flights and airports believed they received the more valuable service, even though they would sometimes wait up to a full minute to get their results. This demonstrates how much value we subconsciously associate with seeing the effort it takes to produce the product or service we buy. And you see examples of this everywhere. Domino's has a pizza tracker, which doesn't just give you an approximate wait time until your pizza gets to your door. They show what step it's in, from toppings being added, to going into the oven, to being driven by the delivery guy to your house. Or chatbots on websites when you ask them a question and they wait a few seconds with a thought bubble before giving you the answer. We perceive that extra few seconds of the bot thinking as value, even though those systems usually have preset logic branches for their responses and could deliver them almost instantly. A final example that stands out in my mind is a newsletter I subscribe to called Marketing Examples. Harry Dry is a marketer who writes an incredible newsletter breaking down top marketing campaigns and headlines. He shares a ton of amazing tips and examples from top companies and is read by thousands of marketers. At the bottom of each newsletter, he'll add a note about how many hours it took him to put together the newsletter, and the numbers are around 12 hours, so pretty significant. If his newsletter said that he only spent 2 hours on it instead of 12, the perception of value would go way down, even if the actual content would be exactly the same. That's the labor illusion. If you want to put the labor illusion to work for your business, you have a few options. The first is to add operational transparency to loading screens on your website. If you submitted a search request or a form submission, instead of just a spinning wheel of loading, you could add a graphic of a magnifying glass sifting through product results, or even a text that reads something like, "Uploading your ticket to our servers," to give people the visual on what is actually happening. If you sell a product or service, having a hero video on your website that shows the production process right away can help create value in the mind of the purchaser. A lot of manufacturing companies do a great job of this, showcasing their complex machinery at work. And finally, you can take a page out of Harry Dry's book and simply add how many hours you worked on a white paper, email, presentation, or article to imply greater value. All of these things can have an impact on consumer decision-making to make it just a little bit easier in their mind to justify spending money with you. Hey, quick break here. I want to tell you about today's newsletter sponsor, Unicorn Flames. They're a startup studio focused on marketing, branding, and growth for early-stage ventures. I had the pleasure of working for their founder, Tim Haynes, for a long time, and he is a fantastic ideator and marketer. If you're an early-stage entrepreneur or have a business idea up your sleeve, send Tim a message on LinkedIn and check out Unicorn Flames at unicornflames.com. I'll have the links in the show notes for you. Now, back to the show. Our next newsletter we're looking at is Small Business MBA, written by Michael Girdley. Michael is the CEO of a holding company where he owns majority stakes in 12 different businesses and shares great tips and information with his hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. I've read a lot of his content and heard him as a guest on a number of podcasts as well. I'll link my favorite in the show notes where he talked about his fireworks business on the My First Million podcast. I appreciate how even-keeled his content is. Nothing about his personal brand is sensationalist or get-rich-quick, despite how successful he is. Today we're looking at the recent edition of his from back around Black Friday about the principles he used to start several of his businesses. Michael has a lot of what I would call mildly contrarian takes, and he starts his newsletter with sharing his complaint about two of the more popular startup methodologies. He says the lean startup methodology, based around asking people about their problems and building solutions for them, generally produces small ideas or ones that aren't really that exciting to build. The waterfall methodology is where you build something revolutionary and people naturally come to it. But this one, he says, is too risky. The method he subscribes to is the effectuation methodology, coined by Professor Saras Sarasvathy. I was naturally pulled in because of his 12 businesses in his holdco, Michael has started 8 of them. The principles can be found on effectuation.org, which I'll have in the show notes, but I like Michael's adapted definitions. The first principle is the bird in hand. Michael shares how it's always best to start with what you have and not to predict the future. Your personality and abilities, your skills and education, and your network and audience should be the first step in validating if you can personally start a business idea. There's not much point in starting a business where you're not best suited to tackle the problem. The second principle isn't very revolutionary. It's the mindset that mistakes are inevitable, so you should learn from them quickly and use them to help you steer back on course and move on. Number 3 is the affordable loss principle. You should start small and make progressively bigger and bigger bets as your conviction grows based on results. Don't swing for the fences on any all-or-nothing bets in the business early on. This is what many venture capitalists try to push for, since they make dozens of investments and just need one to be a home run to make money. But that's not the approach Michael recommends. The fourth principle is the crazy quilt. It is important to pull together a team who have a lot of different skills than you as the founder. Again, this one really isn't that unique to the effectuation methodology, but still important. And finally, there's the control versus prediction principle. Michael stresses that it's best not to try to make predictions for the future that you base your company on. Control what you can control within the business, but only aim to control what is controllable in the present. Building for a predicted but not actualized future is incredibly risky, and again, not the philosophy that Michael prefers when starting new companies. Michael ends with his own sixth principle that you won't find in the official effectuation methodology, the backwards cycle. According to the other 5 principles, you should be setting your business goals last. Under the effectuation methodology, you start with your skills, which lead to your first actions and tests. Those tests lead to increased commitment and conviction, and out of high conviction should come the startup goals. While I only recently learned about the effectuation methodology, this is the plan I'm following for this podcast. I don't have set business goals for it beyond trying to reach the next 100 downloads. and improving the show quality. I simply started with my extensive research of business content, noticed a gap in podcast topics for newsletter curation, and started building. I really loved taking a deep dive into this methodology from Michael's point of view of low risk and no VC-funded startups. This methodology has great applications for projects within established businesses as well. Our final newsletter comes from Just Go Grind, written by Justin Gordon. Justin is a deal scout, venture capital partner, and startup founder community leader, all on top of writing deep dives on top founders of past and present and massive startups. His newsletter goes out to over 23,000 readers in the startup world, and I've really enjoyed his series on how large startups acquired their first customers. The edition we're looking at today takes a look at the story of Stripe, one of the largest companies that a lot of people have never heard of. They're one of the largest startups in the world at a $70 billion valuation as a payment processor, powering millions of transactions online. Stripe was founded back in 2009 by John and Patrick Collison with the goal of increasing the GDP of the internet. At the time, payment processors like PayPal were clunky and bloated from a developer's perspective, so they started building a product to make things faster and easier to implement. Justin shares some great takeaways on how Stripe acquired the first few of their eventual millions of customers. Stripe, of course, got their first customer from a personal connection, as many startups do, but their first batch of customers came from the famous startup incubator Y Combinator. They knew the co-founder, Paul Graham, from having gone through the accelerator program in the past, and were able to get almost 30 customers who were building products fast and needed easy-to-use payment processing. Paul later described how impressed he was with John and Patrick by recounting how they would ask founders if they wanted to sign up for Stripe, and if the answer was eventually yes, they would immediately get their laptop and set it up for them on the spot to give the ultimate speed to value time. After this first cohort of customers, Stripe did some blogging about their technology, but ultimately worked harder on making the product amazing before putting a lot of money and effort behind marketing. As developers started reading their blogs and talking about how great their product was, they started expanding. One of my favorite things that they did was build community among developers. They organized virtual capture the flag events for developers to test their skills to break through elaborate security setups. They ran 2 events that got over 10,000 entrants each and generated a lot of online impressions among their target market. There were a few other fun stories in this newsletter, but Justin's key takeaways from the story of Stripe were these 3 things. First, John and Patrick didn't run any paid ad campaigns until a few years after the business was launched. They stuck to the principle that if their product was good enough, the well-connected target market of developers would naturally share it with others. 2, find your circles that only you have access to build momentum. Stripe had Y Combinator companies that they could pitch as their first customers and get valuable feedback. And chances are, if you are launching a startup or launching a new product line in your business, you have a network you can leverage too. Former coworkers, startup incubators, networking groups, or even personal circles of family and friends can get the ball rolling on your idea before you try to market to everyone. And finally, you have to do valuable things for your target audience. Stripe knew that developers were their target market, and they did things for them even if it didn't directly have to do with payment processing. Whatever your target market is, there are probably events or education opportunities you can deliver to them to get your name in front of the right people, even if they're not direct sales opportunities. Whether you are considering launching a startup or are looking to acquire more customers for your existing business, hopefully the tactics of Stripe give you a lot of inspiration. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, you can find sign-up links and more information about the psychology of marketing, Michael Girdley, and Just Go Grind in the show notes. And if you liked this episode, check out episodes 1 through 4. We featured the psychology of marketing in episode 1 and several other great newsletters in 2 through 4 that you won't want to miss. If you have a newsletter or a business topic that you want to see me highlight in a future episode, please reach out. My contact information is always in the show notes, and I would love to hear from you. And finally, if you enjoyed the episode, it is 100% free to leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It would really mean a lot to me. Thanks for listening, as always, and we'll see you next time on the Business Newsletter Recap Podcast.